That's it, recording.
Okay. Great. So I think it's time. Let's start. So welcome everyone. This is POLLEN 2022 and 23 Asynchronous workshop on other than human political ecologies of wildlife conservation. So myself, Sayan Banerjee, I'm from National Institute of Advanced Studies, and I welcome you all to this session. We have 5 panelists right now. George, who is from University of Sheffield, will be talking about the conservation governance of the European bears in the European mountains. Second, we have Jacqueline from Florida International University, who will be talking about feral iguanas and biopolitics of controlling them. Third, we have Mahesh from the nonprofit Shepherds of Himalayas, who will be talking about the fluid identities of the common leopard in the Indian Himalayas. Then we have Nachiket Kelkar from the nonprofit Wildlife Conservation Trust, who will be talking about the endangerment of Gangetic dolphin in North Indian and Indian river systems. Lastly, we have Stefan Ortiz, who will be talking about the commodification of the mutual economies of humans and bees in Bolivia. So we have presentations from Europe, South America, Asia, and North America as well. So it's a kind of diverse regional representation. And also, I am very happy that people will be talking about a kind of a diverse taxa from mammals to riverine mammals to insects. And in our larger panel of 10 speakers that we originally had, we also have kind of plant people. So so it's a kind of exciting panel for us. So we'll go by this order of kind of for the members. I'm requesting the members to talk about their research and especially their own thinking and emphasis on the other than humans and political ecology. And it will be great if you can kind of summarize your talks in 2 to 3 minutes.
Sayan, the sound was going a little bit funny there, but I think we've got you.
Should I just jump in?
Yes, yes. Sorry. Yes, George, please.
Thanks a lot, Sayan, for this brief introduction, and thanks a lot for having me to be part of this wonderful exchange of ideas. I learned a lot from the other presentations. Some of them I listened a couple of times because there were like great ideas for my own work. I'm George Iordachescu. I'm working as a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Sheffield, and I'm part of a Beasley Business project. It's a new research project funded by ECRC, and we try to look at wildlife trafficking that is happening in Europe, affecting European species. So to decolonize a bit the discourse about wildlife trafficking happening in the global south, to see what's happening in our own backyard. And one of the species that is the focus of this project is the brown bears. It's very prevalent in mostly Eastern Europe and some countries of Central Europe. We don't know much about the trafficking that affects these bears, if it's legal trade, illegal trade, if there is a lot of other environmental crimes affecting these bears, because the data is very, very scarce. And the collaboration between governments or enforcement agencies also, there is a lot to improve there. So one way of doing that I discovered since I started this project was to look at the actual histories of individual bears, you know, and to see if their personal history of trauma, of captivity, of being trafficked, of being abused in circuses, of being moved from one country to another, from one institution to another, of going from through different hands can tell us about the drivers, you know, and the actors involved in wildlife trafficking. And this was one of the methodologies developed just to inquire more into the actual wildlife trafficking, to look at the lives of bears. But then I discovered that the actual life of bears and bear history can tell us much more about lots of different things, from other environmental harms to wildlife crime, to how we deal with rewilding, how we deal with reintroductions in Europe, and how we govern conservation. So being part of this panel really gave me the opportunity to reflect on some of these issues, and of the multitude of bear histories that I collected over the last couple of months. I selected 3 of them. One is the renowned Bruno, who was a celebrity in 2006 in Germany. And his story tells us a lot about how states and different authorities are unable to cope with so-called wildlife return, which is one of the most celebrated tendencies of conservation in Europe. And then I had another female bear from Romania who was a captive bear and died in captivity in close to a hotel. And her history of trauma was fundamental for starting a new movement for bear rehabilitation in the country that is continuing even today. And the third bear was a very recent one. It was a male bear, mature male bear, Arthur, very charismatic one, according to media and according to the activist movements that followed after his illegal killing. And his life tells us about how, even if these bears are strictly protected in Europe, there is a lot of room and a lot of legal loopholes to be exploited by people that are working on this legal-illegal overlap in wildlife trafficking in Europe. So I just used these 3 cases to show how what's happening and how our understanding changes when we actually take bear life serious and we don't consider them as a population to be managed or as a species to be reintroduced or rewilded and so on, but just to focus it on the micropolitics of each bear lives. Thanks a lot for the opportunity again, and I'm very happy to be here with the others and just associate names with faces.
Jacqueline?
Thank you so much for having me this morning. My name is Jacqueline Johnston, and I'm here in Miami, Florida. I apologize now if my dogs start squeaking toys or something in the background. I always have my additional helpers. My PhD focused on feral cats, and my background before coming back to academia was actually working with wildlife and then later at a domestic dog and cat shelter. So I learned quite a bit about the politics of how different species in South Florida are managed while working at these agencies, and having to negotiate on a day-to-day basis the way that, for one of my jobs for 3 years, I was out on the road, and my job was to respond to different human, calls, asking for intervention for injured or orphaned wildlife. But I had to be able to identify what species of bird or reptile or mammal, and then discern whether or not that animal legally could be treated or transported, which agency could legally treat or transport, and then if it could be treated, then there were all these other parameters about whether or not they could be re-released. As I kind of threw myself into the literature about it, I just realized that there's definitely this huge rift between the way that conservation biology speaks about, like George was saying, like about the species level, these larger classification levels and mitigation or conservation kind of ideals and programs versus the experiences of the actual animals that are living around us. So for this presentation, I focused in on what I think could easily be considered an animal that the majority of people in South Florida really do not appreciate. Ironically, over the summer, I was working as a research coordinator for some undergraduates at the local zoo, and they actually have a very large iguana on display in their Amazon exhibit, and that's like a prized iguana. But then in the rest of the property, these wildlife trappers were being paid to shoot them, to kill them, trap them, or even they were experimenting on better ways to euthanize them and the veterinary clinic. So I'm very interested in how our definitions and classification systems of of killability break down in environments and spaces that are strictly urban. These, you know, there is no way that we could define Miami as in any way a pristine natural environment that is somehow being invaded. There is no ecological destruction, as I discussed in the presentation. They don't outcompete any native species for any resources. They predominantly also eat non-native plants. It's just that people are very attached to their ornamental plants. So it's really just, and it's the annoyance, the environment that they destroy is a human one. But that's not like that's not really the intent of conservation biology narratives. So yeah, so this is ongoing research, and I'm also using this research to try to inform some current legal restructuring that's going on in Florida. Because, for example, I also mentioned in the presentation, we have no idea which urban natural predators for iguanas are being removed and killed by these same trappers, because they're also considered nuisance in the city, even though they're protected in the wild spaces just west of us. So, for example, I know that my neighbor removed all of the possums and raccoons from our neighborhood, and now we have just thousands of little baby iguanas, which is going to be a problem in a few years for the same neighbor. So it's kind of like this self-reproducing economy of killability for urban animals here. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mahesh.
I'm audible now? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yes,
Sayan,
yes,
for inviting me here. And I'm happy to discuss what we have experienced and what we have explored with the help of our policy community. Basically, I'm Mahesh from Project Shepherd of Himalayas. We are working with policy transhumance community in Rudranath, that is located in Uttarakhand state of India. It is a part of Central Himalaya, which comes under Kedarnath Wildlife Sanctuary. And the policy communities live nearby in the nearby villages. These policy communities are actually shepherding community, which practices transhumance life, where they live 6 months on the alpine meadows, 3 months in a mid-elevation forest, and finally 3 months in villages. So as a part of this independent project, I started to study their pastoral practices, how they interact with their landscape as well as animals, focusing on common leopards, because during their transhumance life, they have plenty of interactions with wild animals, ranging from black bear, common leopards, then there is foxes. But I was focusing mainly on common leopards because this is the carnivore which causes most damages, or we can say livestock losses. But comparatively to diseases and other natural tragedies, it is less, but still it's considerable, and it's a huge economic loss for them. As I started to study them, as I started to interact with them, I carried out this whole interaction for last 3 years, from 2019 to 2022. Before actually starting this study, I have learned actually how they tend their sheep, how they migrate, and I have almost spent about 1 year with them, not continuously as time permitted. And I have through that 1 year, I gained their trust, and slowly started involving them and started interacting with them, how actually they interact with various wild animals, how they relate with them. During this interaction, I was lucky that during 3 or 4 times I actually encountered common leopards who are actually visited our camps and greeted me at night at 2 a.m. And then again, during these interactions, then again, as we lost, we have plenty of examples where we have lost our livestock. But during this interaction, again, with palsies, they do not retaliate in most of the cases. Rather, they considered it as considered leopard a jungle ka raja, or maybe protector or god itself. So to understand this phenomena more and how they relate this common leopard, which is a wild animal, in some cases they also cause livestock damages. I spent I actually casually interacted with them. I have carried out in-depth interviews with palsies, that is, then shamans, then traditional healers, the priests of various temples, the ex-hunters, the village heads. And during this interaction, I was focused on few questions like, where do palsies and leopards interact with each other? That is, means geographic spaces. For example, in villages, in forest, or in alpine, or that is a geographic space where they interact. Then how they interact with each other, that is, which means which media, and how they respond to the shared landscape and its resources. How palsy shepherds relates and reacts to particular interaction with common leopards, and how they narrate it, how they perceive it, and how they shape their attitude towards it based on those narrations. And finally, what are the various factors affecting this relationship over the longer time. So during this interaction, I came across various factors which I have already talked detailed in our presentation. During this, I found out that there are few recurring themes and few recurring narratives. For example, Palsy consider them as a protector or god himself, god itself. So they tolerate these losses, considering leopards as a protector, and considering like paying them a tax for his services. Another is during their transhumance lives, they have plenty of interactions. So they have inventory of ecological observation regarding this bug, that is leopard. So based on how they observe the particular habits of leopard, they named it. For example, on the basis of diet, they nomenclate it as various, for example, various identities. For example, Gyolbak, which eat langurs, for example, Kukurbak, which eats village dogs. Based on those, their ecological observation, they named it. For example, based on its hunting habit, again, they named it. Another factors which are dominant, as I said, the Rudranath comes under Kedarnath Wildlife Sanctuary, which is protected areas. And so again, there is a friction. I will not say friction, but yeah, there is a kind of little agitations with forest department as well as through bureaucrats, for example, as well as bureaucrats, because in Uttarakhand it was legal. I will say legal to kill various wild animals in 1960s, and after Wildlife Protection Act, it's become illegal. And then there is another factor. There is a formation of separate state of Uttarakhand from Uttar Pradesh. So the rule becomes very stringent, and it is illegal to kill various wild animals. So on the basis of that, the leopards were not part of landscape anymore. They were like owned by forest department, and that whole responsibility lies with forest department. So that is another factor. And then again, the most another important dynamic is identity of being Pahadi. For as I said, Uttarakhand actually separated from Uttar Pradesh state, and there is a constant struggles of identity and belonging for particular state for mountain people. So again, there is a narratives that some of the leopards has been released by forest department in mountain forest. So they are there. They do not belong to these mountains, but they belong to plains. So there is a constant struggle of identity and belongingness for particular things. And then finally, in that way, that again, there is a factor of bureaucracy, and there is a factor of identity of being Pahadi. Apart from that, there are other factors such as magical practices. I will say shamanic practices, which again, how Palsy interpret them and relate with them. And to summarize, actually, I will say the identities of leopards, considering the various interactions with palsy and how they perceive it, is very challenging when we consider from conservation perspective, because these whole narratives can change the perception to negative or to positive. So we have to think during this whole interactions. I realize that the palsies relate leopards through various mirrors, like how they interact with through which media, and based on that they relate ourselves, or like for example in our case human with non-human actors, and on the basis of that they perceive it. And if we consider this as a when we go ahead with implementation of conservation policies for particular animal, it is very important to study how they perceive the particular animal, and how with the help of local community we can implement these conservation policies. I think that is really important going ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Mahesh. Nachiket?
Yeah, thanks, Sayan. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So thanks for this opportunity, and I would like to just start by saying that I have been and I continue to be a student of Ganges River dolphin, which is a very strange, weird sort of river dolphin that we find in the Indian subcontinent. The larger rivers of the Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra plains have two species of such dolphins. One is the Indus River dolphin and the Ganges River dolphin. Now, the thing is, these dolphins are what I like to call, inspired from the title of this session. Not only are they other than human, but they're also other than dolphin, because, they're really ancient lineages that still continue to survive. One of the oldest surviving cetaceans. They're also almost completely blind. And anybody who sees a good picture of this animal doesn't believe that this is how a dolphin can look, because our images of what a dolphin should look like are quite, I would say, corrupted by species like bottlenose dolphins and other marine species which we often see and enjoy watching. This dolphin is very different, and that also makes it an interesting sort of case to examine how its identity as a dolphin itself has changed over time, in relation to the identities of the people that live alongside it, along the river systems that it occurs in, and how those two identities are sort of related to each other. And as they change, how they also change each other. So, a few years back, most media reports in India would carry a picture of either the wrong dolphin. Sometimes they would even have pictures of buffalo and something, which they thought would be dolphin. The buffalo would be partly submerged in the water, and they would think that it's a dolphin. So the level of awareness was almost nil. And from there, we are now at a stage where, this has become a poster species of some sort. There are like awareness campaigns and all sorts of, there's a wave of programs to spread awareness about the species, to tell people what they should do so that the river dolphin gets conserved. And what is quite amazing about these programs, of course, is their wide reach. But also the flip side of all these programs is what they do on the ground in terms of the people that they touch. And in turn, the dolphin also, because the people with their new ideas of dolphin conservation, what we have been seeing is that gradually being connected to conservation interventions changes people's ideas about the dolphin itself. The expectations of the dolphin's behavior that the people carry now also change. So, for example, we have heard people asking us, why can't this dolphin jump out of the water more so that people can get a good look at it? So, that is not how this species is in the first place. So, there is this whole, what I like to call a relationality of identities and also expectations increasingly from a species that continues to survive despite all the extreme threats and pressures that its riverine habitat faces, from pollution or from dams or from climate change or from destructive methods of fishing, for example. Despite all this, the burden of expectations is on the species to somehow change itself, to make its conservation happen. And this is what I broadly discuss in my talk. The other aspect of these changes in identity and expectation also are reflected in the way communities which are touched by these awareness programs change. So, what would be a community of fairly innocuous people living by the riverside? Based on who gets to access these conservation awareness programs and who gets to, gets the merchandise, or who gets a picture of theirs taken, that itself, we have seen this itself creates a certain class within these communities. It further fragments communities. It also corrupts people in a particular way. It also alienates people who were not able to be a part of these programs or did not want to be a part of these programs. So I think this is also something that I was very excited to see in all the other panelists' talks, that there is a common thread of animal and human identities that somehow through very complex processes end up changing each other, end up not only changing the identities of one another, but also imposing expectations on the animal of how they should behave and how they should look and how they should change. So yeah, I think I'll just stop there, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and also from the participants. So thank you.
Thanks, Nachiket. Stefan?
Yes, so hi everyone. I was very happy that I could see all your presentations and also, well, learn from them and see many complementarities, how we all somehow focus on apparently very specific types of relationships, but from there we can talk about multiscalar and complexity. So that was very inspiring for me. In my case, my research comes from somehow I rebelled. I have a background in economics, and I rebelled against it many years ago. And more recently, I started. I wanted to go back to it to think what being an economist means. I focus more on ecological economics, and one of the things that strikes me more is how this discipline of economics has favored the commodification of human-nature relationships through basically the standardization of those relationships that are seen as valuable, and valuable in a very specific terms, which are utilitarian terms, so through utility maximization. So by thinking that human-nature relationships are governed by individuals that seek to, as robots, that seek to maximize their utility, economics has really favored commodification. And this is seen in landscapes like rural landscapes where I've worked before, and now in Bolivia, where you can see the transformations, rapid transformations of very diverse relationships into very simplified and destructive type of relationships. So my research draws on that, and I wanted to try to understand the complete story, or at least a more complex story. What is happening in those landscapes that are being commodified? What is happening in the relationships that are being transformed? And I focused on human bees and honey relationships because it's what emerged from the field, and it's what emerged from conversations with people, locally indigenous people. And somehow I wanted to show, or I still want to show, because it's an ongoing research, that utility maximization, it's not the whole story. It exists. It is a rationality that exists, of course. And it's a big pressure from markets and from powerful actors that are part of globalized food chains like soja and sorghum. But it doesn't tell the whole story. There are many types of other relationships in which and other types of values, ways of valuing more than human relationships that are hidden by these huge forces that affect this region. So I wanted to tell this story, and through the lens of a non-anthropocentric perspective of morality. So how humans value these other species in non-anthropocentric terms, but also how instrumentality, so the instrumentality of an external nature in very highly commodified landscapes can still be relational. So I don't want to say that there is no instrumental way of seeing an external nature. There is an externalization of nature and a marketization of relationships, but that doesn't mean there is no relationality in it. So relationality still exists, and for me that's the key message also to know that there is hope also that diversity can emerge even in highly commodified landscapes like these ones in Eastern Bolivia where I work. So that's more or less what my research is about. And yeah, I hope you could see the video, and I look forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, so we have listened to all the panelists out here. I would request the viewers to put their questions in the chat box, or maybe raise your hand. Firstly, I just want to just have a kind of a question on methodology. So as I was going through the videos, and what I found as a common methodology was that of storytelling. I mean, storytelling as a method to not only communicate your research, but also to understand the other than humans. From George, from Nachiket, Jacqueline, Stefan, and Mahesh, that storytelling as a method to understand the other than human lives, as well as the political ecology, has come up very big in your presentations. So anyone wants to talk about how, why, and how storytelling came into their kind of their research and thinking about other than humans? Anyone can jump in.
I could try to start just for a couple of seconds. This is absolutely a great question, and I noticed that as well. In my case, it was a conscious it was a conscious choice to use storytelling, and I learned lots from Nayani Kamathur's book Crooked Cats. She did fieldwork in Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh about discourses and narratives about why some cats, big cats, become crooked, and why we manage them in certain way than other cats that are not crooked, and so on. And she uses this method Beastly Tales, which are not only stories about animals, but also stories in which we can recenter the lives of the most vulnerable, or those marginalized, or those that are not necessarily at the discussion table when decisions about conservation intervention are taken, or when legal developments are happening, and so on. And I think it's a very powerful way of yeah, you could say that it's a bit anthropocentric, but in the same time, it has a very strong dimension of social justice and environmental justice to it, you know, because it's not only a story about an animal, but it's also a story about this animal entanglements with the livelihoods and with the people that are most close to them. So storytelling, I think it's great, and when you can talk about Beastly Tales, it's very, very productive. But probably this will not hold in the case of all animals. I'm not sure how you can have Beastly Tales about butterflies, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
building on Stefan's, building on George. I also like to refer to Dr. Nayani Kamathur's books, as well as to Dr. Radhika Govindarajan's work in Uttarakhand. Actually, most of my studies, I will say, kind of inspired from their studies, because they have worked before me. Like Dr. Nayani Kamathur has actually worked in Gopeshwar, which is nearer to my field site, which is Rudhanath. Gopeshwar is the nearest town to that particular field. And Dr. Govindarajan has worked in Kumaon region, and she talks about animal intimacies, like how people relate and how the various stories actually narrate through different kinds of people from various classes with various backgrounds, and what are the various kind of work they have done from women perspective, from main perspective, from young young men and women perspective and how they relate with that. So building on that idea, actually, I have started my work as a storyteller itself. I do not call myself as a researcher. Rather, I will call myself as a storyteller who actually learn from these policy communities how actually they interact with their landscapes, their animals, and what are their narratives and how they relate these narratives and how they relate themselves based on these narratives with these animals. And I believe the storytelling media is most effective when it comes to telling the normal layman peoples or bureaucrats what is actually going on, because I think storytelling is one of the most powerful tool through which you can actually convey your idea in most simplistic term with minimum jargon, I will say, and in visual perspective. So in that case, it's easy to absorb what one is trying to tell to someone. And because of this reason, I think even in my case, I interacted with bureaucrats as well as with policy efforts. And through storytelling, actually, I can relate to everyone, like right from a kid in a primary school or a bureaucrat in forest department. I think this is the reason I think I will consider storytelling as one of the most effective tool when we, try to implement certain strategies. Apart from that, one another book is by Professor Ambika Ayodhya, where she mentions about from Northeast, actually, Arunachal Pradesh, where people consider tiger as their brothers. Again, she approached similar storytelling approach and try to study how these tigers who are suddenly have been discovered, they are not discovered. I will say they are rediscovered because local communities always know there are tigers in the Bug Valley, and based on that, how when the tigers are become kind of, I will say, a conservation hero, or I will say a kind of umbrella species there. So the relationship between locals and tigers changed because of that, and that is the reason I think we should always consider the local communities while dealing with these wild animals who are entangled with them. So I think storytelling is one of the best approach one can take when we have to deal with people from various backgrounds.
Anyone else want to join?
I'll add a little bit to that. When I generally approach my writing and my presentations, and I generally, I loved what George was saying about the individual bears, because I generally do start with a story about a specific animal. In this research, particularly for the iguanas, I wanted to tell stories about the stories that are being told. So I'm directly confronting what I would consider to be rampant, kind of signed off on scientific storytelling that is based on these narratives that really, when you retell the story from a different perspective, from the perspective of the iguanas that are here and the other animals that are being killed by wildlife trappers, you really start to tear apart the original narratives that are the ones that are the dominant stories being told. So it's kind of like a confrontational, difficult, uncomfortable way of telling kind of the backstory. It reminds me a lot of just the way like industrial like farming removes the animals away from people. They're you're not going to see the large pig farms like in the middle of a city. Nobody wants to see the ugly reality of where their prepackaged meat comes from. It relates to a lot of other work like that, and in this case, iguanas are something that are talked about every day. Everybody's like, yeah, go out and kill the iguanas, but nobody really wants to talk about how that's happening or how that is being how that is impacting the individual animals. So even though I don't speak specifically about an individual animal, I think that idea of retelling their story and forcing forcing a reconsideration of the dominant conservation story that's being told is really important.
Thank you. So anything else? Or
I would add
yeah,
one idea. So in line with the previous speakers as well. So I think storytelling is it's also a method that invites to as academic researcher to humility, right? So we are so full of egocentric egocentrism as academic researchers, and this method is also a way to listen, not to silence our concepts, as Bruno Latour used to say, and listen with humility. There is potential for that, and also this is important for this type of research because there are so many relationships that we cannot perceive because of our own cultural, political, economical backgrounds from other realities, that the only way to really at least have some sense of those relationships is to listen to those who perceive them and build them in their daily lives. So that's something I really appreciate of storytelling, this invitation to humility and to listening.
Thanks. So if Nachiket has any answer to that, or I should go to Kate's question to Nachiket, that Kate is asking that, can you talk more about the outcomes or consequences that are happening because of changing expectations of how dolphins should behave?
Sure. Thanks, Kate, for that interesting question. So let's look at outcomes or consequences for who. So if we think of outcomes for the Gangetic dolphin, these expectations are, I don't think that they actually have any outcomes or consequences directly, until and unless there is a direct intervention to actually provoke the species to exhibit a certain behavior, which is not possible given the scale of the river systems that it lives in, or based on what people think of it. And the more the distance of the person with expectations from the dolphin or from the river, the expectations are also, they get stranger and stranger with distance, right? So in terms of, there is at one level, there is this whole thing about building awareness, becoming friends of dolphins and whatever. But that may not have any consequences directly until and unless the larger questions are actually addressed. And that's not going to be done by awareness programs. Larger questions relate to how water is managed at large, how dams are operated, or how pollution issues are addressed, right? So that is beyond the scope of awareness programs. However, let's talk of outcomes for people. And in terms of that, there is a certain vanity that keeps growing. Like this strange idea that dolphins lost their eyesight because of pollution, whereas actually it has been an evolutionary loss. So if the river gets cleaned up tomorrow, will the dolphins be able to see again? That's the kind of ridiculous expectation which you're never going to see in real time or in human lifetime or in dolphin lifetimes, because it's an evolutionary outcome that has already been, that the dolphin has already undergone. But the power of this kind of wrong discourse is so much that the expectation remains. And I think that is a problem, because then it doesn't lead to any constructive outcomes or consequences on either side. Yeah, so I would just answer it that way.
Thanks, Nachiket. So we have a general question from Omar, that whether our panelists have a kind of an experience of communicating this other than human research to the mainstream conservation biologists or practitioners like forest department staff. So anyone wants to join?
I'll jump in. Two things is, one is particularly when researching, animals that are classified as invasive or pest or nuisance, particularly in urban environments, what I have found over and over again with different species is that there is such a lack of data that it's very difficult to collect the data to trouble the dominant conservation narratives. So I spend a lot of time trying to look up like the histories of how knowledge and how this data has been produced, usually by state organizations or by other local organizations, so that they can frame the stories about these animals in particular ways. And then I'm in the process right now of actually gently trying to nudge them toward tracking, for example, like trapper activity within urban limits, so that at least then we can have a sense of how many animals would there be in an urban space, which species would there be here, how would that change if we stopped removing them, how would the different like interspecies relationships evolve and potentially even themselves out in a way that is different than what is going on right now with our rampant culling system. And I will also say that there does seem to be a general trend, at least in the United States, where like the National Science Foundation grants want interdisciplinary people on boards for research projects. I was recently asked to be on a panel of supervising undergraduate research. And anytime that I tried to bring up like, a perspective from political ecology or animal geography or any of these, other kind of more of like a social sciences perspective on a specific multi-species relationship or animal-human encounter or mitigation, I was basically politely told to sit down. Some of that I'm sure was gendered. Some of that I'm sure was like hardcore natural scientists telling the social scientists to sit down. So I think it's really important that if we do get these opportunities to sit on interdisciplinary committees with conservation biologists, I think it's important that we push, even if it's just by storytelling, even if all we have is just a little bit of data, or we can point out the fact that the data is missing. I think that those are critical opportunities for us, even if we do get told to sit down and shut up.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline.
So any other response from the panelists?
Yeah, I would like to add to Jacqueline's point. For example, when we, there is a meeting of interdisciplinary people from various background. So the least, I will say, people who are, attended very seriously are storytellers. I will say storytellers are people who are dealing with human dimensions of conservations, because they are considered as a nuisance, basically. In our case, for example, as I said, the policies are considered as a nuisance who are actually entering the protected areas, and Forest Department considers them as people who should not be a part of that particular landscape, or they should not be there because it's protected areas. They are destroying meadows, and there are lots of long list of complaints. But if one sees before actually it's before that area is considered as a sanctuary or protected areas, the people have always been part of that landscape. For example, if Kerala Wildlife Sanctuary is formed, I do not know the exact year, but maybe consider, let us say 30 or 35 years. But the people have been part of this landscape from last hundreds of years. And I have seen the documents where British have given them rights, that is, they called it as Hakakubs, which roughly translated as traditional rights. They can graze and they utilize the resources. But as partly from colonization times, we consider the sanctuary as a kind of romanticize that term, like it should be protected from people, and people should not enter in this particular habitat or particular area because it's strictly for animals. So that concept and the concept of conservation from colonial times is strictly followed right now, and it still not has changed, and people are still considered as outsiders in their own area when that particular area become protected. And so whenever there is a there is a meeting, or we'll say there is a project which goes on, implementing the policies for particular landscape or particular animal. There is no scope actually. I will say there is a scope on paper, that's it, but there is no actual inputs or anything from local communities which are considered in that particular policy making. So I think that is like there is a huge challenge faced by people who are working with humans. And another part is that, like talking with forest department, as I said, in our case, for example, there is a continuous friction, as well as there is a agitation between local villagers, policy community with forest department, because as I said, when the laws become stricter, and when it is illegal to hunt any wild animal, even though it causing losses or maybe crop losses, human losses too, it becomes forest department ka baab, like that leopard or leopard belongs to forest department. It's not a part of landscape anymore. That how people are pursuing it. And when we communicate with any, for example, I have seen plenty of papers in last, I think 5 or 6 years, where plenty of people are taking data of losses, for example, livestock losses, human losses from relevant forest department, and they are doing data analysis. That is perfectly fine. But when you go deep into this data, if you see there is a pattern. For example, if we consider, in our case, for example, I consider Gopeshwar as one of the largest town, the losses reported by villagers are situated nearby towns. So when we analyze those data, we get a feeling that these are the only hotspot, or we can say these are the hotspots where leopards are killing more livestock, or where leopards are interacting negatively with people. But as we go deep, as we go deep into remote parts of villages or villages which are remote, they are not able to report those losses, and there is no formal mechanism, I will say, and the forest department really do not entertain them. So there is a kind of, I will say, a misplaced or misinformed hotspots, maybe I can say that, because the people who are nearest town are able to report those losses, and because of that there is a concentration of losses nearby towns only, not in the remote villages, because it's not reported at all. So I think in that perspective, we have to look up those data from whatever the data people are reporting. But apart from that, we have to actually go into the places which is not accessible, and actually they have more losses, I will say, or not losses, but more interactions with these animals, and that part should be considered, because when we present those data to larger community, it gives a kind of misinformation, I will say, because it is not giving a complete picture.
Thanks. So Nachiket, George, or Stefan, do you want to jump in? Yes, Nachiket.
Yeah, I'll just answer the question directed to me by Swapnali about the question is, where is it? You mentioned about different perceptions of sensitized and non-sensitized locals towards Gangetic dolphins. How do we deduce the reaction of the latter category of people towards the species? So thanks for this question. How we have managed to not deduce it exactly, but to kind of track it, is by basically it has been a somewhat organic process, I would say, because we have been working with these people both on the now sensitized side and still not sensitized side. But we have been observers and participants both in these various interfaces of interaction. And I think the way people react to or to what benefits they see from these sensitization programs is something very practical to track in terms of the tangible outcomes that people see ahead. We work in Bihar, which is the poorest Indian state in terms of per capita income and other social indicators as well. And that is why any such opportunity, even if it's a sensitization program or awareness whatever slogan raising program presents itself as an opportunity to many local people. They think that what will we get? Maybe they will give us some money, maybe they will give us a nice cap for my child to wear, or a nice t-shirt, so the tangible thing is that somebody got those things and I did not, which creates a sense of either rejection that people, local experts tell us that what is going to be the ultimate fate of all these programs, it's just a waste of time. But it's also a sense of there is also a sense of rejecting the idea because they could not be involved in it themselves. Or there are wiser people who say that all this is fine, we are talking about all this today, but what about tomorrow? What about larger change? What about our communities who continue to live on the margins? And this is mainly fishing communities on these river systems. So what about that? And the reaction towards this species in particular is that this will do well anyway, so we have been saying it since our childhood. So what is your program going to now achieve? For this species, we know that it dies sometimes, it gets stuck in fishing nets or whatever, but it will still survive. So it's a kind of people not involved see a certain disconnect. The people involved, no matter what they feel, have to say that yes, this is very important and this will lead to something good, because they're already they're also a part of it. So I think we have to be reflexive here. We have to look at how similarly, in a neoliberal economy in particular, conservation programs and development interventions by the state actually become similar. Whereas, we are pitting our conservation constantly against development, but the mechanisms through which conservation and development both reaches communities becomes the same. And I think that is something that we need to sort of keep reflecting and think about. What can we do differently if conservation is actually different from economic development in a neoliberal economy? I think that sort of would summarize what these two groups would perceive about the species and about the programs that they may or may not be a part of. Thanks.
So one question I wanted to ask to Stefan, that your understanding of the kind of commodification of this mutual economies of humans and bees. Have you ever tried to communicate to the policymakers or the kind of people on the higher pedestal, or what kind of responses have you got from them?
Well, not yet. I haven't tried. I think there are some chances of communication with policymakers, which are very challenging because they imply a translation process that there can be a lot of loss in translation, no? That always happens. And it's what happens, for example, with the IPBS, the International Panel of Experts on Ecosystem Services. They have a very, I think, a very successful and pretty nice framework on values of nature, for example, which is, I say, useful because I've seen how policymakers in my country, in Colombia, have been using it shyly. This IPBS framework, it has some influence and impact. So I do think that the stories that territories and more than human relationships in local or specific places tell cannot be translated I cannot see how to translate that, maintaining the richness of what those stories express to public policy. But I don't even know if that's desirable, because there's also so much intimacy and so not everything has to be translated. So I worked before this research, I worked with FAO in Colombia, and one of the work we did was to try to build in a participatory manner. We tried to build a framework of how communities can select, and they do it all the time, how they can select aspects of their very complex territorial relationships that can be translated for policymaking. And in the translation that they can do themselves, they should there should be a risk assessment. What can we translate and what we can't? For example, there are aspects that shouldn't be translated because they risk of being commodified. Some indigenous people in northern Colombia, they have some knowledge of how to represent landscape relationships in different symbols, that they take some of them and transform them into products that can be sold in markets. But they only know which elements they are going to use as a marketing strategy and which others are totally out of the market. No, only they know because they chose. And I think that's important. It's not researchers, it's not policy makers who should choose what can be translated and what can't. It should be people as owners and as storytellers who choose what to tell and what not to tell. I think that's really important, and we should be very respectful of that.
Thanks, Stefan. So we have a question from Elizabeth Oriel. So if I have understood correctly, I can just rephrase the question as, have you all seen that that your bears or bees or dolphins or leopards or kind of iguanas, through their lives or their ways of living, I mean, have they changed or have they kind of pushed back towards fraught conservation policies, or kind of, I mean, people have looked into their lives and they changed the conservation interventions policies. So have your animals and insects and reptiles have those kinds of agency to, you know, have a dialogue with the conservation process?
I'll just mention quickly. So we like to say in Miami, you know, everybody loves to live here, everybody comes to retire here, but all the animals like to live here too. So green iguanas, I think just by thriving, they push back on these conservation processes. But as I mentioned in the presentation, there's like woefully few scientific studies about their interactions with the environment that they want to protect, which is the Everglades, the wetlands, because they don't live there. They only live in the city. Where you really see a species that I find to be pushing back in a very fascinating way, and this is all like brand new research, are the Burmese pythons, who are actually living in the wetlands, and they're thriving in the wetlands. And the state of Florida has invested millions and millions of dollars. They incentivize, they pay hunters per foot. They pay more for female snakes than for male snakes. So they have incentivized people to go out and hunt them out in the Everglades. The way that I find it to be interesting that they're pushing back is that they also funded a scientific program where the conservation office at the zoo was getting some of the juvenile snakes, implanting transmitters, and then releasing them on purpose to see where the snakes go and how the snakes are negotiating the Everglades. Where I feel that they're pushing back in an interesting way is that so far none of the juveniles have survived. They've all been eaten by other native animals, either hawks or bobcats, or in one case even another snake. And so because they did policy first without any science, now the science that's being produced as a result of the funding of those policies is troubling the entire narrative. So in a way, I do feel like the snakes are almost fighting back against the stories that are being told about them in these very interesting ways. So, but that's, I mean, this is like, it's like happening right now. So it's still too early to tell exactly how that's going to play out.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, sorry, George, you want to go first?
Yeah, George, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I can just very briefly. I think the answer to this question differs very much from one species to another. If you think about bears or wolves, their behavior, mostly their feeding behavior, turns upside down everything we know about conservation and how we imagine different borders between what is wild wilderness, what is domestic. Bears would feed on absolutely everything that they would find available, but not at the same time of year. You know, they feed on different things in the spring and on different things in the autumn when they have to fatten up for the winter torpor. So at least in countries where they have a very large population like Romania or Slovakia or Bulgaria and so on, the way bears move around and occupy different ecological niches such as land abandonment, abandoned orchards, depopulated villages, and so on, forces us to rethink how we do conservation in those areas, even if it's not a private protected area, but how we conserve the species or how we mitigate conflicts and so on. And in some cases, if you take wolves, for example, there has been a jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice that said that wolf habitat is wherever the wolf you will find the wolf, wherever the wolf wanders, you know, so the wolf doesn't have to be protected only in the wilderness or in the national park or in the strict protected area of the core zone of a national park, but wherever you find it, you know, so the lives and behaviors of these animals definitely changes the way we approach conservation and triggers fast-paced changes, at least in my experience from Europe, because I don't know much about other geographies.
Yeah, Mahesh?
Yeah, adding to that, I will say leopards have not directly pushed back, but they are causing enormous money to forest department. For example, as forest department pays compensation, right? Once they kill livestock, and there is a policy that if leopard kill livestock or any animal, any animal in protected areas, they will not give any compensation, right? But if it kills animal or livestock in nearby villages or in the community forest, they have to pay. For example, in our cases, the cattle can cost up to 15K, that is about roughly around 200 USD. So what people do, if leopard kill a livestock or an animal like cattle in protected forest, they will drag it to community forest, and then they will report it to forest department that leopard has killed a particular animal in a community forest or nearby villages. And in that way, actually, they are kind of, exploiting this forest department, exploiting the forest department and exploiting the whole bureaucracy to gain money. The negative side is that there is one of the interesting phenomena I have seen that, before a few years, let us say 20 years before, people do not used to, release the animals, wildly in meadows and all that. But in last 10 to 15 years, because of, lack of motivations to do hard work, people are releasing cattle in forest as well as in meadows. But they do not release a mulch animal, I will say, who are actually producing a milk or who is very essential for farms to do a farming work. But they are actually releasing the animals who are, they are not producing any milk. They are, beyond their age, and they, it did not cost them much if they dies. So they are selectively releasing the animals. So if it even killed by any wild animal, they do not have to face any economical loss. That not, I will say, economical loss, but it will, it is not that important animal considering to other animals. So what they will do, there are narratives, actually, I have not seen it, I have not encountered it directly. People are intentionally tying the animals who are about to die in protected in community forest, so that leopard can kill it, and on the basis of that, they will apply for compensation to forest department. So there are the leopard has been used as an financial resources for that is again kicking back against forest department, because as they believe that this leopard, which are property of forest department, so how we can utilize that? They are utilizing this leopard belonging to forest department for compensation purposes by staging few of the livestock losses, I will say.
Nachiket, Stepan, anything?
Yeah, so I'd just like to share one interesting finding from our own work with Ganges River dolphins. We were basically looking at mortality of river dolphins because of getting stuck in fishing nets. And after we reviewed all the data available, we found that nearly 70 to 75% of the mortality happens in legal fishing nets, not illegal. So in fact, dolphins are much better off around illegal fishing nets as compared to legal fishing nets. Now, this is a pushback in the sense that the dolphin or this new insight that we see from this work is actually making us question the whole basis of what is defined as illegal and legal in fishery policies across India, especially in riverine and wetland ecosystems, which has been a 150-year-old sort of colonial dogma that we have continued to carry. So in a sense, this finding leads to or we hope that it will lead to a decolonizing pushback on our fishery laws in different Indian states. So yeah, thanks.
Stefan, anything?
No, well, in this case, just made me think about a very challenging case that I haven't studied, and so I don't have a very strong position about it. But I don't know if you've heard about hippos that were raised by
Pablo Escobar.
Pablo Escobar in Colombia. So this is a very challenging topic here because he brought them in the 90s to his big hacienda, and after he was killed by the state, the hippos just stayed there, reproduced, and colonized the area very successfully. And apparently they are a danger for different native species, for local people. And the solution has been, as always, an economic one. What is the cheapest to do? So it's kill them, put venom in their food, or just kill them. There are other possible solutions to sterilize them, which is very expensive, etc. So it's always, the question is always humans playing gods and deciding through their very limited values what to do. But it's challenging in the sense that it is a very rapidly reproducing species in this case, because the context is favorable to it, and it's also endangering ecosystems. They are heavy, they poop a lot, so they are contaminating rivers, etc. So who's the bad here, who's the good guy here, etc. Who decides? All those are very huge moral questions that are happening now in Colombia. I don't know where the debate is nowadays, what the last decisions are. I don't think there is a last decision yet, but it resonates a bit with Jacqueline's case of the iguanas, although iguana seems to be a bit less, have a bit less negative impact from different perspectives than hippos. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that case to the table.
We have a raised hand from Anindya Sinha. So can you just go ahead?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for this absolutely illuminating discussions, which I've been enjoying so much. I just wanted to tell you a little story of from my own work. And this was brought home to me when Sayan asked about whether animals themselves are responding to conservation strategies. Perhaps we were talking about how humans respond, but I think sometimes non-humans may do it as well. And the story comes from Bandipur National Park, which is a reserve forest in southern India, where we've been studying bonnet macaques for many, many years now. And what we have recently seen, so the bonnet macaques are considered a common species. They are not protected in any way. However, they do become a nuisance when people feed them. And therefore, the forest department has made very strict instructions not to feed the monkeys. However, what seems to be interesting is, and I don't know whether this has happened in response to the relative lack of food, because people, if they follow the forest department commandment, should not be feeding the monkeys. They have now developed a very novel communication strategy where individual juvenile macaques go up to people who have food in their hands and hold up their hand, which is a very unique behavior never reported in the wild from any primate species before. And then they give this call, And this call, along with the outstretched hand, and the hand is outstretched when the eyes, the gaze meet, right? So the macaque will not hold out its hand unless there is a complete eye locking with the tourist. And when this comes out, the tourist invariably gives it food. And I think this kind of a almost human appeal of calling out, which is a call which is typically given under lost situations, but is co-opted into this foraging strategy, along with this raised hand, very human-like, is particularly directed only towards humans. They don't direct it towards the members of their own species. So I think this is again a story. The macaques are telling us their story, and this story is in some sense in defiance of the dictum that they should not be fed. Just a insight that I wanted to share with you. Thanks.
Many thanks. So here is a comment from Anindya Sinha as well, that he was wondering that whether the behavioral strategies and decision-making processes displayed by individual non-humans could also be construed as stories that are telling us about their own lives, and whether we could turn human storytelling on its head and use this methodology to forward a deeper understanding of more than human beings. So if anyone wants to comment on that, please feel free.
Yeah, can I comment on that?
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor Rana, for that question. I like to tell one story, I will say. In this part of Uttarakhand, in nearby Gopeshwar, as I told, there is a narratives that people are, there is a narratives among the people, among locals, among policy shapers, that, the Pahadi Bagh is very different as compared to Plains Oka Bagh. That is the Bagh, the leopard from plains is actually behaves differently, looks differently, and react to particular situation very differently. For example, one of our policy shepherd called Chidiyaghar ke pyare guldar. It roughly translates to the Bagh who actually belongs to zoo are very, are likable, and they are like pet. Basically, they are like pet. So what, from that perspective, I will say, when policy shepherds see a particular Bagh or leopard, and they behave in particular ways, for example, the leopards who are nearby villages, who policy consider them as an outsider, or which are been brought there from by forest department, released there, they behave differently from their local Pahadi Bagh. For example, they do not afraid of people. They will walk around nearby villages. They will, they will walk around in villages on very odd time, like in afternoons. They do not care about people who are working in farms. But compared to that, the local Bagh or Pahadi Bagh is very shy, and it's very hardworking. Actually, it do not hunt nearby villages, because as Pahadi people call them, they are very hardworking. They will only hunt in, they will hunt in forest or in protected areas, not the animals which are belonging to villagers. So they consider whatever the paltu Bagh, I will say, or a Bagh which has been brought from outside is actually hunting is lazy actually. He is very lazy. He did not want to invest much of energy to hunt wild animals. Rather, he will feed on dogs. And that animal, that leopard, is called as, in my presentation, I told it's called as Kukur Bagh, a leopard which hunts village dogs. So in that perspective, actually, based on the narratives, they construct the identity of particular Bagh, how it walks, how it, how it moves, how it hunts, how it, go around in its territory. So based on those interaction, actually policy tell the stories of that particular Bagh, and that's how I think through their eyes, actually I learned that based on their interaction, the identity of Bagh is very fluid, like based on how they relate and how they relate their own struggle, their own life, and their own landscape with the particular or individual animal, they construct the whole identity around that particular animal. I think in that way, the behavioral strategy, we have to, that in that way, that particular individual, that particular leopard is telling its story, but through the eyes of policies.
Thank you. So can the storytelling from the animal's perspective can be also done through animals like dolphins or iguanas or cats or bees, or group of iguanas or colony of bees? Any discussion on that?
Sayan, can I please?
Yes, yes, please.
So, I have often wondered if any kind of storytelling, especially animals that are not easily observable, has to be with a verbal medium. So one of my pet projects, which is just still only in the dream stage, is to, write a story of Gangetic dolphins in Braille and in an audio mode, because that's a different kind of connect that that particular audience could form with a species that's also visually challenged, So these are, I think, ways to explore increasingly more so as we have remote sensing approaches, which includes things like dolphin acoustics, which we use heavily in our work also, to interpret what we can't see with our eyes in different ways. And I think there is a lot of, there is a whole very powerful sort of scope out there to experiment with such storytelling also for such species. Thanks.
Stefan or George. Yeah.
So in the case of bees, I haven't asked that question yet myself of how can we basically listen to bees, right? To hear their stories in their own terms. I think that's very challenging, and it's probably possible, right? They have definitely different types of buzzing in different situations. Their buzz depends on if they feel threatened or on the weather, on so many things. My own research is methodologically anthropocentric, so I am studying people's narrations of bees and the stories that people tell of bees, how they perceive them. So I think I chose this method because of many restrictions of time, restrictions of my own methodological knowledge, and the project itself. Yeah, ideally there could be a mix of knowledges where I could work, for example, with ecologists or bees experts who could tell me a bit more about bees behavior, etc. But I don't have that right now, so I'm not using that. Something that I am exploring as a method is soundscapes. So it's still anthropocentric in the sense that we interpret the soundscapes. It's humans who interpret those sounds, the sounds of the landscapes. But it's also a way to listen, right? To keep quiet and just to see which type of sounds bees make and humans make, and which type of sounds emerge from human and bees encounters. And that's another way to tell the story, maybe in a not so anthropocentric way. So that's an exploration. I still don't have results about it, but I will have them soon, I guess.
Great. Anyone else?
I was going to add, in regards to technology, and I've spent, this is kind of like a side interest of mine, but particularly during the pandemic, people spent a lot of time at home, of course, but people apparently also spent a lot of time watching their Ring cameras and noticing how many animals were walking by their front doors in the cities, like particularly like because I live like in a neighborhood, but like we're surrounded by heavily like densely developed urban areas. And these sort of surveillance technologies are creating an increased awareness of urban animals in a way that has become much more commonly discussed, like on social media and different platforms. I mean, Instagram next door, like all of, like I'm constantly seeing people saying like, oh, crazy, I saw a raccoon in the city. And I'm like, well, I mean, these guys have been here all along. It's just that they you know, the acknowledgement that these animals were there. So I think it's interesting the way that in some cases, that kind of allows an animal that is otherwise, you know, nocturnal, not going to be directly observable. Those animal stories are coming into the human realm and being shared and distributed in a way which is almost unmediated, because we're, you know, it's not like I'm going into their den and placing a camera to observe them. They're literally just passing through a space that's considered a human space. So they're really kind of telling their own story in that way. And I will just add anecdotally that I consider my space to be a safe haven for animals, any species. And we have Muscovy ducks who are also considered non-native and they're considered a pest. But I have what is considered by the ducks to be a very ideal nesting area in my front yard. But I realized that some of my neighbors didn't like the ducks. So I put surveillance cameras around their nesting area that have speakers, so that if anybody walks by and like looks too long or like wants to talk about like removing the eggs or something like that, I'm like, keep moving, like these ducks are protected. And it scares people half to death because they have no idea where his voice is coming from. But it's kind of like an interesting way that the ducks and I and technology are collaborating to create a safe space for them, even if it's just for the nesting phase.
Sayan, if I
anyone
may
else?
add on that.
Very quickly, please. So because
Yeah.
we want to wrap up now.
Yeah, continuing to the Jacqueline points, for example, in one of my presentation, I have mentioned that during COVID lockdown, our leopards went viral. Like they are everywhere. Because one of the reasons is that during lockdown, as I told, Uttarakhand is famous for various shrines, as you know. So Rudranath is one of the famous shrines for Lord Shiva. But in that particular lockdown period, approximately 60,000 people from outside Uttarakhand were working there, came back to their villages. And plenty of villages, ghost villages in Uttarakhand came back to life. And, you know, as there is nothing much to do at home, people started to, chalo aaj chalte hai. Like they are going inside the forest for various, maybe picnics to, explore things like that. And because now everyone carried smartphone with them, so wherever they found wild animal, they will click a photo and they will upload it to various social media. So during that particular time, the reports of sightings of leopards like picked like a hell for all sides. And it's all because the number of people entering forests has increased due to, COVID lockdowns. And that way our leopards goes viral on every social media. They are everywhere.
Thanks for the anecdote. So we will be wrapping up here because we have exceeded the time by half an hour. So just to summarize what we have learned today, and probably will be learning in the future, that so the basic points of other than human political ecology, the main core area is the transgression by the other than humans as well as the humans, not only physical, I mean, not physical into their space and our space, but from also kind of a disciplinary, from biology to politics, as well as from politics to biology. So there is a kind of things that are happening. So it's only sensible to understand lives either for a group of animals or individual lives as well, to understand political processes, and through which we can free the political ecological approach from its chains of anthropocentric chains, that we also through politics we can understand animal lives, and through animal lives we can understand politics. We also see that political ecology can go at different scales when we look into animal lives from very local perspectives, local political ecological stories from, say, for the dolphins, for the bees, for the bears. But it can go into a scale of national, regional, even geopolitical across countries. We have seen the wolves and the bears and other animals, which creates a kind of geopolitical tension. We welcome the geopolitical turn in the political ecological approach of conservation, but here again, just looking into animal lives will enrich it further. We also see that there is a emphasis on the vernacular ecology, that there are certain understanding of ecology by people who exist, who live with this wild lives, and there is a particular understanding which may be overlapping or even confronting scientific mainstream scientific narratives. But if we also see the downside of it, that these kinds of vernacular ecologies often create a kind of a class relation in case of the dolphins that Nachiket was talking about. That kind of the conservation approach, when we go into this local people, community-centered conservation and all, it can also create separation within the community. Intra-community dynamics can play a huge role. So we have to understand that as well. And lastly, storytelling will have a great if we want to approach animal lives seriously into political ecology. For that, we need a kind of a new methodology, or kind of a combined methodology, or a kind of better dialogue between kind of political ecology, ethology, etc., geography, etc., in one kind of a container. So that is all from my side. I'm very happy to chair this session, and it was wonderful. I mean, the stories and anecdotes were really wonderful. I would request Sam to save the chats, and it's really wonderful. And I also want to thank Sam and Omar for letting us, go overboard like half an hour with this session. So, and all this session will be saved, and it will be available in the website soon. I thank you all. Any parting comments from any of you that I will welcome? Oh, it seems all are exhausted. So yeah, so the parting comments from my side is that please keep in touch. And I think we are on a great journey here, because it's a new emerging area. We are kind of play a kind of a pioneer role on this journey. So if you have anything in mind, anything you want to collaborate or discuss, please feel free to mail around, and we'll be in touch. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so
Bye,
much,
everyone.
Sayan. Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Super interesting.
Take care.